Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Or perhaps I should say, good evening, fellows.
Nice.
Very good.
Because we're here to talk about the Book of Needlecraft by The Fellow Passenger, which is a new album which came out a couple of weeks ago, which we've all been listening to, and we're going to talk about it and chat about these things. Because there's lots of things that we like to talk about when we get together, things like decision making, motivations, all kind of arty existential stuff, and maybe a bit of techie things as well. How are you both?
Very good, thank you.
Okay, good.
Grooving for a Monday night.
For a Monday in January. I've got a cup of tea.
It's very cold out there.
It is.
Mine's
But it's
too.
very warm in here. So I listened to the album and I got very excited. I got a kind of fuzzy feeling. It reminded me of my younger years in the early 2000s, getting into electronic music for the first time and being a little bit kind of like, wow, what is this crazy music these people are making? And also just kind of being reminded that there was a period when I was perhaps a little overwhelmed by this idea that people would take quite risky decisions whilst making music and actually, making the commitment to kind of, put it out and to do what you've done. I was kind of like, I had flashbacks of getting into kind of glitchy IDM for the first time and being like, I can't believe someone thought this was a good idea. Like, this is so exciting. Like, this is a decision that someone would make, and now it's kind of pretty much the way I look at music, like generally anyway. But it sparked a little thing in there because maybe I'm a bit older now. I'm a bit more fussy and it takes a lot to impress me, but I enjoyed it very much. So I'm looking forward to picking your brains about it. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about how it came about with Point Source Electronics.
Yes,
who have released the album.
Point Source Arts. To go back in time, during lockdown, I did a little bit of an exercise of posting 1 minute's worth of music every day for 100 days on Instagram. It was more for me to just get into a routine to practice. And they found me through there, and I released another older album through them, and they contacted me, I can't remember now, this summer or something, and said, like, I think the world is ready for another album from you.
So it wasn't the first one. You've released with them before.
Yes. So the first release was just a track on one of their compilations, and then I did an album in 2021, I think. 2021. Yes. So lost track of time, but yes, I did another album for them, and they said, like, okay, the world needs another one, and they try to the great people over there, Mike and Alex, who sort of run it, they've been super, super helpful. And they try to release something every month. And they said, okay, would you be interested in releasing? Now it ended up being in January. They super helpful with feedback. And also they help do the mastering and the cover art and things like that. And obviously like spreading it and things. They've been super. But they don't have any sort of, they don't make any creative decisions for you. They're not going to sort of tell you what to do and not to do, which is great. So I could just go off and sort of do what I felt I needed to do. And I wanted to have some form of concept to hang these tracks up on. Find something that, even if it's just notional or subconscious, that when I put these pieces of music together, that there is a sort of a running theme. And one day outside the local pub, the house opposite, they put a box outside their house with like, free, please take. And there were some books and plant pots. And I found this book on the street. And I was flicking through it. I've put all these markers in here because there were some incredible illustrations in here. well, this is a random page, but with patterns. And I mean, there's just loads of them in here, and some weird old-fashioned sort of sewing machine equipment. Let's see if you can find something else.
Did you look to those patterns for ideas in the music?
Well, I just started thinking like, oh, patterns, and it was sort of interesting. And I was flicking through, and the names in there. I mean, it's very, very notional, but I was thinking like, can you replicate the rhythms that you sort of see in those sort of sewing patterns, and like use them as a foundation to the patterns that I put together? Like, it's very, very notional, and things develop. Even though that might have been a starting point, it sort of developed on from there. But that was the sort of foundation of putting the tracks together. And the other thing was that I try to do music most days, and quite often they're like really quick sketches, sort of throwaway sketches almost, and they're not finished at all. And another thing that I did is just to have a sort of a starting point. I was flicking through a lot of those and finding there's something here, and then starting picking things out from those recordings. Some of it was done on the modular, some of it was sort of just done in Ableton, all sorts of sources. Some of it, like, I didn't know, I can't remember what I recorded it from. It was just, things that I'd done that one day when, I didn't sort of think much. And that became like almost like a sewn together patchwork of lots of things that I've done. And as I tend to, if I do any melodic stuff, I tend to do a lot of stuff in minor pentatonic D sharp, which makes it really easy to find things, different bits from other tracks, and you can sort of throw them together and see how they match, and that becomes the foundation of a track that I then continue sort of build on.
Very nice. So you got inspired by a random book on the street?
Yes. In other words, yeah.
Very nice. And that's actually the cover art. The cover of the book is kind of also the cover art.
Almost. So I when I was talking to Point Source Arts, and they asked me like, okay, for the album cover, do you have any ideas of what you would like? And I told them about the book, and I scanned a hell of a lot of pages and sent to them. But they didn't take exactly this book. Mike, who did the design, apparently in his local town somewhere in Illinois, there is a sewing museum. So he went there with his camera and took photographs and gathered a lot of material that he then used when he put the sort of sleeve design together.
All right. So they're based in Illinois.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fantastic. It's a really satisfying listen. It's very bubbly, and there's lots of stuff going on. And like I say, it kind of reminds me a bit of the classic IDM approach of like the early 2000s, where there's kind of like lots to explore sonically as a listener. And also it gave me a pretty good reason to actually turn on my monitors and listen to something on my monitors quite loud, and have like a kind of proper experience rather than just listening to it on my earpods or in my car or something. I was kind of like, I know this is going to be high quality. I need to listen on high quality speakers. So I recommend everyone else do the same thing. Dedicate some time to focusing on it, because it's a high quality listen, and at times a bit mad as well, like a bit bonkers. Like, yeah, it was good. Alan, what did you make of it?
I would definitely agree. There's a sense of crafting about the whole album. Every sound comes over as something that's been really thought through and polished. You tell us a little bit about that, how you create your sound design.
There is a hell of a lot of automation. I would say both the sound design and the composition itself is almost like a collaboration with the machine, whether that is Ableton or the hardware. So I would say the technique is I've set up some little systems which allows me to randomize presets for either soft synths or if you do on the modular or something. So in theory, you set up a certain amount of rules that the software or the hardware needs to follow. Like, what are the things that I want to automate and how much do I want to automate them? And then you throw that at the machine and the machine throws something back at you. And most of the time it's something that is not great, but eventually you find something that's like, oh, there's something to this. And then you take these automations and maybe rein them in a little bit more. So you get the sound that you're looking for. Maybe it wasn't something that I even knew that I was looking for, but the machine helped me understand what I was looking for. And then I could sort of take and shape that a little bit further. So if we talk Ableton, there's a lot of expression control, of course, and some devices that I've made myself that does similar things with randomization. So there was a lot of that and a lot of FM synthesis, because I think that's interesting both for percussion and for sort of melodic content.
I think it's fair to say, for those that have followed Philip's channel, he spent a lot of time experimenting around with generative techniques, but also structure as well. And I would say almost obsessively. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. And
would you say that the album is a result of that process last year, or where you were developing that process? Is that it? Would you say the album's the output from that?
I wouldn't say that is the finished product. I would say it's part of that journey, definitely. And I am not done yet. And I think it's almost turning the generative aspect of it into an art in its own right, rather than, I think it makes a big difference if someone has built something really complex to make generative music, giving it to someone who can then just press the button and it spits something out. That wouldn't excite me so much. But if I have built the system, then I would feel pride in pressing that button if I have made it possible to press that button, if that makes sense. And I am not as far as I want to go. And I've got lots of plans this year to take that even further. But on that generative process, I think this sort of, I've also realized that maybe there is a lot of skill in setting how much random something is, because if it's completely random, it can just so easily turn into noise. But to rein it in so it becomes something musical, but you're not entirely in control yourself, because I feel like if I put my hands on a keyboard, I can maybe play a nice melody, but it would be similar-ish every time, whereas the computer would throw something back at me that I wouldn't necessarily do. You know, like there's no muscle memory involved.
There's a bit of a collaborative element to that, I think.
Yes.
And something that I've kind of talked about, and we've talked about a lot, and I've said in response to people who are a little bit like, if you just keep pressing random, then how much are you actually really making music? And my response is always, well, yeah, sure, there's loads of random elements, but there's still a human being curating it all and ascribing or inscribing. I always need to make sure I get that one right. Making a decision that it is music for them, for their needs, in terms of, you know, whatever it is that they're trying to compose and execute, or whatever
I think what's interesting as well with new AI techniques, and I read somewhere that there's new algorithms that can listen to a piece of a song and then could create more of the same. And I would say that's exactly what you don't want from an assistant music tool. You want the randomness. You want to find something, to your point. You want to be able to find something that you don't normally do that's going to come out different. So why replicate something else and copy it?
I think there's a big issue with something like that on, you know, if you're buying something online and it says, oh, you like this, and then it suggests something that is almost the same rather than something that is completely different, but in a way that you might still like it, which I think is interesting. And I suppose that's the thing that I want to build. And will I ever finish it? Probably not, but it's an interesting journey.
Can
In
I?
terms of the album as well, I was looking. Sorry, Ned.
No. You go.
I was going to say, in terms of this, I took a listen to your previous album, and let me get this right, it's Requiem for 4125.
Yes.
So, in terms of stylistic, I can see that it comes from the same place. But what I would say, there's a load more dynamics and variation in your new album compared to the previous album. I can see, and you said, well, it was a year ago, 2 years ago. There's obviously been a lot of growth on your side in terms of dynamics and variation.
Yes, I can, and my own reflection on it is that there are more non-percussive parts, like more tonal content in the new album. There's more little phrases and melodies and things, whereas I think the previous album is much more abstract and percussive. And I think that comes out of that I have learned a lot more about, doing tonal things.
It shows the confidence levels, but I'm guessing your 100 sound bites a day, which you did somewhat obsessively as well, and fair play to you for your discipline to get that done, but some of that coming out as well in that process.
Absolutely. I think that it even though those pieces in themselves are not great, but I think it's from a learning perspective was fantastic for me. And just do, it's better to do something than wait too long and not do anything until you have a huge amount of time or whatever. Just do little throwaway sketches. And I think also for speed, in terms of going from nothing to something that feels interesting, I think I've become quicker at that, like to get something close to something that's interesting.
Speaking about discipline, as was mentioned just then, and in comparison between this release and doing 100 tracks or one track a day, or 100 pieces one a day, which to me seems perhaps more like a disciplinary endeavor in terms of trying to keep consistent and try and be busy and use that as an opportunity to experiment with something, but kind of have something to show for it afterwards. Like, what's different from doing that to then actually having to make an album, which is kind of a little bit more of an experience and perhaps like has a bit more of a narrative arc? Like, you've kind of got to think about maybe where things go together and, compiling it and all this sort of stuff. Like, was there a huge amount of difference in the process because they were kind of, the endeavors are quite different? One is kind of like, I'm just going to make some music every day. And this is like, I'm going to make something that's just a single thing.
I think that I used a lot of the techniques I learned from that process. But I think the big differences in it is that I wanted the album, I paid more attention to make sure that it felt complete and polished rather than a sort of throwaway sketch. And also, if I would just do 1 minute's worth of music, you can't move through that many different sections of a song in 1 minute. So to be able to do something that is longer, but still feels interesting, that you don't lose interest. So that was something that hadn't been practiced so much. So those things were different. And I have this thing, which obviously I don't do when I just do a little one piece every day, that I've worked on several of the tracks at the same time. And if I hit a wall with any of them where I felt like, I'm stuck, I would just drop that and just pick another one up and see if I could do something on that. And then also sometimes I felt really excited about something that I'd done, but then I would deliberately listen to it the next day to see, like, was that just in that moment, or did it still feel as exciting? So it was sort of a parallel process over time that made this happen. I think it was still fairly quick to put these together. In one sense, you can say, like, I'll put it all together in a couple of weeks or so, which is not entirely true because it was based on a lot of material, both that I had recorded earlier in the year, and like, so it was not entirely, like it was sort of patching things together that I'd done and adding new bits to it. So yeah.
Ray, are there any bits that are from the 100 pieces one a day on the album, or is it all kind of pretty much fresh stuff?
No, there would probably be. I think it's difficult to distinguish the bits anymore, and I can't say like, oh, I used that particular day because I can't remember now. I could probably go through because I think some of the earlier versions actually have the original file names. So I would have to dig that out. But I think there might be some bits that would have been used. I might have just taken parts of it rather than something in its entirety.
All right. Were there any kind of bits where, I'm going to be careful how I ask this question, like where you were kind of like, it's almost a bit absurd, I'll put it in anyway? Like, do you ever have moments where you kind of, something happens and you kind of laugh? This is what I do. I find things and I go, that's funny, I'm going to put that in. And
yes, I can't think,
because there are some quite wild moments in there where I'm a little bit like,
yes.
wow.
I can't sort of say, oh, that track, that particular point, but I can totally see what you mean. And it's usually when there is that some degree of randomization, usually when maybe there is a little bit too much feedback on a very short delay or something, and it's sort of just, it's almost like the track is falling apart a bit. And like, I find it incredibly satisfying when you get that falling apart, but then if it somehow just like comes back together again and continues. Yes. So yeah, that's
recover the track.
And I can see that if I'm working with hardware and just like go for it, sometimes it just like slips out of control, and I find that quite satisfying, unless it gets incredibly loud. Or sometimes it's yes, there is some sort of strange. They were getting way out of control. I think it's the second or the third track where there is some bass lines, and that was just slipping totally out of control. And then I had to spend quite a lot of time to perhaps rein it in a little bit, like because it got seriously loud or seriously distorted. But yeah,
it's almost like saving the song is kind of part of the song, saving it from falling apart entirely.
Yeah. Is it literally like I just wish in my head I see this Disney cartoon when they are out with a caravan, and like eventually the whole caravan just like falls apart and they're sort of like racing down some mountain or something, and I sort of just picture that, like it's just like barely holding together but then everything is fine in the end.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. I like that whole thing of like maybe it is just about to completely fall to pieces, and then it's kind of like, what is it anymore? But then somehow you manage to bring it all back.
Yeah.
And that can be like a satisfying dynamic to explore, I think.
And sometimes that has to be artificially put back together rather than I was actually saved in the moment.
Yeah,
it's always the case. Yeah.
You're creating the sensation.
Yeah,
that's
I suppose it's in a way a sort of building up tension and release in a strange sort of way.
Yeah. And the thing is with kind of like glitchy electronics, I don't know, I can't really think of like a huge amount of genres where that's kind of almost an intention. I suppose that there is sort of like some free jazz that could maybe almost get to a point where it's just completely cacophonous and everyone knows and is in on it. But then there's kind of a reason for that, and then they bring it all back. And perhaps in some bands, maybe, I know I've played in bands before where we've just had these freak out moments where we're just like, we don't really care if this is or isn't music anymore. We're just making a noise, but then we're going to come back and it's gonna rock.
Something that I think is, I don't think I've managed to do this deliberately ever, but occasionally it happens by accident, that something that is on the beat and then it's falling apart, but when it comes back together again, it's sort of offbeat or something, like there's something that there has been a shift in how things are overlapping or something. So it feels like there is all of a sudden everything fits together again and you recognize the pieces, but it's not put back together as it was. It's just like it's sort of offset in a different way, and that can feel really, really good and surprising.
Yeah, almost like a mutant version of its former self.
Yeah, something like that.
It's interesting trying to capture that deconstruction process where you can experiment. Perhaps it's easier depending on equipment. It's hard to do, in my opinion, in Ableton, but perhaps with the modular, you can get a bit crazy easily. But then you've got the challenge of bringing it back. I think you made that point earlier on. But there's something about the live situation where you have to commit to something. You don't have a chance to overthink that. You just like, okay, things are going a bit wrong. Just go for it and make it. That's what we're doing. How do you regulate that? Because you can't. Do you sit there and say, I'm going to be crazy for 10 minutes now, and then I'm going to calm down a bit? It's a bit more contrived in a way, or do you just let it happen? Is it happy accidents?
You haven't got anyone there to say, rein it in a bit, Phil. I think you've gone a bit far. You've got to make that decision yourself when you work on your own.
Well, maybe you have someone that pops out and says exactly that.
I think there are multiple ways of doing this, and even if I do it in Ableton, that if I use things like LFOs and like expression controls to randomize a lot of stuff, one thing of doing it is that I record. Let's say that I'm going to need a few minutes, but I record 10 or 15 minutes, and I pick the bit when it falls apart in the right way, because there's a random aspect to it. But there's probably also lots of times when it falls apart in the wrong way and just becomes really annoying. And then I just discard those. And if I am lazy, I don't bounce it to a new audio track, because then that's the sort of commitment. So you sort of record a whole bunch that it's just got the randomization in there with the expression controls and LFOs and things, and I just have to render the entire track and just hope that it comes out all right. And sometimes it does, and sometimes you just get artifacts and things that are quite annoying, and sometimes they are right on the edge of being acceptable, and sometimes keep them because that feels quite interesting that you get these sort of little unruly elements. So either, bounce it to an audio track and pick out the best bits, and you know that the next time you replay it, it's going to sound exactly like that. Or go a bit rogue and just keep the randomization in there. So every time you're going to render it, it will sound slightly different.
Some electronic musicians they're very much into the curation of the sound, and they want to pour over things endlessly. But then there's other people who are constantly moving towards the live thing, as live as you can be. I don't know whether there's a couple of questions that are follow-up questions for that, but what's your view towards moving to a live or more spontaneous piece? I mean, you mentioned jazz sentiment earlier on, and that kind of feel you get with certain types of jazz music.
I think I am not the sort of person that would sit and nitpick and draw in automation by hand for every single sound. I just can't. I can't be bothered. I'll trust. I'll give the machines enough freedom so I can accept that there are some things that are not going to be probably as I would have drawn them. That's fine. But I feel like I would not necessarily achieve what I'm doing if it would literally be live. If I would be there on stage, I would probably be too nervous, or either it would derail way too much or way too little. I don't know. So I think it's I like to leave some to chance. I don't think I am the sort of person who would want to sit and draw every little automation and pick every little tiny little artifact and sound by hand. I'll leave some of that to the machine.
Can you listen to your own music when you finished it, like your new album? Will you sit and listen to that in the car?
Yes, yeah. Well, I did. I think I've become better at that because it was something that I wasn't able to. in the past. But yes, this one I would do. And I know that if I've made something, and sometimes when I'm in the moment, it's like, wow, this feels really great. And when I listen to it the next day, it's just like, gosh, this is awful. And then I can wait a couple of days and listen to it again. It's just like, actually, this is pretty good. So it's almost like it's not constant. But yes, certainly, like with this album, I listened to it quite a few times. And the last few days, sort of when I was, in quotation mark, done, I think there was another 3 days when I sort of listened to a track here and there, and then I had to go back and fix something. And a typical thing is that when I make music, things that would represent the sort of hi-hat sound, while I'm making it, somehow I always make it too loud. And when I listen to it 2 days later, it's just like, gosh, this is super loud. And then I have to go back and turn it down. I don't know why that is.
Did you say that you kind of worked on this quite quickly, or not? Oh, well, or that? Yeah, I mean, how long were you working on it for? Because it seemed to be that, like, you mentioned it to me sort of towards the end of, or coming to the end of last year.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, they want, because they were going to do the mastering and artwork and everything, that I think it was the end of October when I submitted it to them. And it was originally intended for a release, I think it was December or something, but they had to, because of time constraints, they had to push it to early January. But yes, so I think active time, like working on it, like assembling it, I think that was, it was probably 2.5 weeks. But as mentioned, a lot of it is a patchwork of stuff that I've done over a long time. And when I made those things, I didn't know that was going to make it on to the album. So it was building on a lot of material that I already had. And it was much more of a process of finding the bits that fit together and then adding all the missing parts to make it into complete tracks.
So that point at which you are listening to it to see if you think it's good, is that like a fast process? Because it's not for me. I might need months and months of listening to stuff in various environments, and especially if it's an album and I've put a lot of thought into the track listing and the overall kind of narrative and arc of it. And if it doesn't land for me when I take it in as a whole listening experience, then I'm like, I've got to go back in. And I'm just curious if that's, because I think what we're talking about here is kind of is that balance between being meticulous and not meticulous, and just kind of working fast.
I don't think I am meticulous, really. I think while I was making, these were not necessarily only the tracks that I was settling for. During that process, there was probably another 4 tracks that were sort of in the mix for a while, and then during the process, I think you feel which ones stand out. And at different points during that process, tracks got dropped. And as I was working on several tracks at the same time, I would quite often render them out and then listen to them, even though if they were unfinished, even though they were sort of just little snippets, and sort of listen to them and swap between them just to see, like, do they feel like they belong in the same space? Because I think that was certainly some reason why I dropped some of the tracks, because they didn't feel like they belonged in a way. But yes, I think it's fairly quick and a lot of gut feeling.
Standout track. I know that's a tough one. It's like asking you to pick your favorite child or something, but
I think I have my favorite, and I also have my least favorite. So I think I have to think of what it's called now. Pillow. I need to bring it up. Is it Tapes on Pillowcases is my favorite track.
That's really interesting, because I was trying to pick one when I was listening to the album earlier on, and that was the one I picked, genuinely. And I think I picked it because it had ghosts of Boards of Canada vibes to it. It's particularly towards the end of the track. It sort of reminded me of a bit of that.
There
which
is
is a good
something
thing.
that I think, like, I like how that came together because it feels like I like the variety, but there is a certain sort of bass sound in there that just lands on a note that feels incredibly comforting. And like that happens towards the end. I wonder if it might be the same. The one that I like the least is Honeycomb Stitch, because even though I like the sounds in it, it feels like that track is not really traveling anywhere, where it feels like the other tracks are much more of a journey.
Interesting. I'm glad I've picked your favorite as well. That makes me feel happy.
I'm just interested that you have a least favorite, and now I'm starting to wonder if I have least favorites in my tracks. Maybe there
What's
are
your
ones
favorite
that
one off this album, Eddie?
I couldn't tell you right now because I haven't listened to it for a week, but I listened to it solidly in the first week, maybe 3 or 4 listens. There was one towards the end that was like quite sort of beaty and straight and beaty, which I was kind of surprised by, but I liked it. It was.
I think that's probably
ravey.
the Honeycomb Stitch one. I think the one I like the sound, but I think that's the one when I listen to the album that I sort of get a little bit bored, perhaps. Even though the sounds are nice, it sort of like fizzles out a little bit for me in a way.
The ordering's pretty good because I like the opening track, and I actually my second favorite was the second one on the I've got a listing here. Is it Garment Patterns? I thought that was another one.
Yeah, that seems to be a lot of people have mentioned that one in particular, liking that one. That's the one with the where the beat sticks out quite a lot compared to the other tracks. Yes, it's got I think maybe something that feels a little bit like a break beat in there somewhere.
Yeah. That's it hangs together well. It's something that I'll certainly be listening to more. It's got that, it's kind of a combination of loads of my favorite stuff.
I did. So there is an online radio station called Index who do electronic music stuff. And they asked Point Source Arts, and I have put together a 30-minute set for them, which is going to be on there, I think, early next month. And putting a 30-minute set, it was nice because there was obviously I'd just done that in the last few weeks, revisiting the tracks that I made last year, listening to them again and actually sort of unpicking them to a degree to be able to sort of find bits that would be nice to put together into sort of a 30-minute set. And it's got some new things in there. And I think like I've almost managed to improve some of them even further to my liking anyway. Like I feel like, oh gosh, why didn't I wish I would have done that, but I don't think I could have done it then. I think I probably moved on since October even, like by experimenting and learning more.
Remix album.
Yeah.
Don't suffer. Just release it again as a remix.
Yeah.
Yeah, do a special edition in 20 years' time.
Yeah.
With extra scenes and
CGI on computer or something. Yeah.
with more CGI in it.
Yeah.
That's
Jabba the Hutt. Yeah.
CGI Jabba the Hutt and blinking Ewoks.
Yeah.
On the geeky side of things, is there any particular gear that stands out that added a lot of character to the sound?
Some of it, I don't even know exactly what gear I used because there were sort of loops and things that I recorded ages ago. I think there's some SH-101 in there, and it's just a sound that I love. And I think some of the bass sounds come from that. Then the process, this is probably cheating a bit because when I did this set now, I took everything, and because I've since replugged my studio in, and it's much easier for me to route things through hardware effects and stuff, even if it's Ableton. And I've done that for this light. So when you listen to it, like some of it will have something that it just sounds much more organic. I love that. But that's cheating because that was not on the album. I think, yeah, the SH101 I would give a big shout out to. And I used in a way, I got the Erica Synth's sampled drum, which is a pretty incredible sampler, but it's also a little bit, it's a good workhorse, but I don't think it's made a significant difference to the sound. It didn't sort of color it in an interesting way. So yeah, I think the SH101, that will have to be it.
With the Erica, is that more that it just takes you to different places because it's a module and you want to?
Yeah, it's more that. Yes, it's more the process. And I think generally if I work with the modular compared to working in Ableton, I think it's the more the process that actually make me end up in a completely different place. And I think it's unfair. Often you see people who said, like, it doesn't matter what equipment you have, it's more what you sort of do with it. And some people show how you can sort of reverse engineer. Oh, this is how you can make Ableton do something that a modular synth does, or vice versa. And I don't think that's quite the point, because if you already have the answer, yes, then maybe you can reverse engineer it. But if you don't have anything, and just as a starting point, I know if I start patching on the modular, I'm just going to end up in a completely different place rather than noodling in Ableton. I like both for different reasons.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think modulars can be extremely frustrating, and I've sort of sensed that there's the peak of the modular boom is kind of flattened out now. So I think there's been a lot of stuff being sold, but then there's going to be the people who are going to stick with it. I think it does offer something, and if you're into it, you're going to stick with it and potentially sell it all in 20 years' time for a fortune.
I think it's one of those things where on the modular, I think that's the only place where I really get that sense of you start off with something and it just sounds awful or uninteresting, but all of a sudden, like everything all of a sudden just fits together, and it just like ended up as something that you hadn't anticipated. That could take 5 minutes, it could take half an hour, it could take 2 hours. You just don't know quite when that's going to happen. And it's usually when I make a mistake, or I just turn a knob a little bit too far, or something happens, or I drop the wrong sample in or something, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, what happened there?
In terms of mixing, there's been previous episodes about mixing. Like, did you mix it yourself, or did you get a lot of help with that? And I said mixing and mastering to separate the two.
I did the mixing, but they did the final mastering for it. So I sat down, and I think that was the last few days was really spent on going back and listening again. And also I tend to use my monitors and these headphones, and sometimes I sort of listen to it in the house on some other speakers as well. So I did all the mixing, and then I sent it off for them to listen to, and then they did the mastering and sent back the mastered versions, and I just had a sort of 3 or 4 little corrections to make, but they were really, really minor, and I think they did a great job of taking something and just made it sound better and more pronounced.
Definitely sounds crisp.
Yeah, they do a really good job, I think.
Could you go into a little bit more detail about stuff that you used? Like, because I think a lot of your YouTube channel is kind of Ableton, maybe, and perhaps a lot of your Instagram, maybe, where was it Instagram you were putting these 1 minute things on?
Yes, and
that's a little bit more whatever, like a lot of hardware, more hardware centric, maybe. So I'm just interested in how the in the box versus out of the box was dealt with on this.
I would say towards the end of the process, like when those weeks, most of the time was spent in Ableton, but it was using loads of material that just came from lots from the modular stuff. And to make it even more complicated, so I tend to I use loads of samples, but they're all my own ones. I don't use any third-party samples in there. So I generate loads of sample libraries. Some of that is from the hardware, some of that is in Ableton. And then I take some of those libraries and then I put that in sort of Erica synths, and I got the dual sampler from 4MS as well. So that could have been made in Ableton, and then it puts into the modular world, and I do something with that. And then it goes back into Ableton again, where I sort of process. But there was a lot of time spent in front of the computer. And I think a lot of the tonal stuff, a lot of that was done in Ableton using Operator and some of the wavetable synth, but a lot of it is just sort of FM tones. And then I used a bit of SH101 as well.
Well, am I right also that you've just recently like released a sample pack of like everything you made from last year or something? Did I see something, a post of yours recently?
Yes, that's right. So what happened last year, something happened so I got a Patreon page and I host my stuff on Dropbox, and I'd done something. So any links to the samples that I had released as different posts, like all those links were just broken. Like I still had all the files, but the links that people were expecting to be able to click didn't work anymore. And I decided to combine that with like, okay, I'm going to just take all the samples I have, upload like the lot. That's all samples I've made. I think I can't remember, 7.5 gigs worth of samples. Upload it there. And it was sort of quite cathartic because I've decided now in 2023, I'm building up a brand new library. And I'm probably going to do the same at the end of this year, that I do maybe a same sort of thing, because I felt like that library that I've built up, there are lots of great sounds in there, but I had used them quite a lot. And there were certain ones that I kept reaching for over and over again. And I just needed to start with a clean slate. But yes, a lot of that library, if you get that, then you have most of the building blocks that this album is built out of. Yes.
I had a similar idea where I was thinking, I think maybe we've talked about it. I think maybe I might have been inspired by that, what you just said, of like I was going to make a video where I delete all my samples. And
I haven't deleted. Like, they're still
I've got
there.
to make new ones. That's just it. It's like where I haven't got any kick drums. Well, I've got to go and make like 1,000 kick drums, like in an hour or something. It's just like something I just thought would be, like cathartic, as you say, like just kind of like just clearing everything out. It's just kind of like, why have I got a folder of 5,000 kick drums and I only use the same 3?
Yeah. I decided to. So I started this year. I've already started building the new sample library. And especially now, when something that I've noticed in this process is that if I have sounds that I've made in Ableton, like if you take the, what's it called, the synthesized drums, it's like kits that comes with Ableton. Are they sort of Max for Live devices or something? Like there's a kick and a snare.
The DS synth and snare.
Yeah.
Max for Live.
And even if I take those and then I run them through some hardware, all of a sudden they just come alive. And then you just set up some automated processes where you just modulate the hell out of the kick drum, let's say. And then on top of that, you run it through the modular, or, like you just process it further. And then all of a sudden, in no time, you have loads of really interesting sounding kick drums, and it just sounds alive somehow. And now when I've started using those sounds, it makes me really excited because it already sounds different and more interesting than the stuff I did last year, just because I'm just building up a new sound set.
There's definitely something to be said for that. That's similar to my experimentations at the moment. I weakened after years of thinking about it and bought the Octatrack. I think the Octatrack is known for being quite flat in the way the sound that it makes. I mean, what you put in is what you get out. But if you route it through modular effects and filters and things, and while they're being modulated in sync, I would agree it's creating some stunning sounds that I wouldn't normally know how to get to. even with loops and things.
There's going to be certainly. So what I have set up a little chain here. This is what's going to come this year, I think. I sort of rediscovered an old effect. I have a Zoom 1204. I don't know how to say it, like 1204 multi effect. That if you're after something that sounds really realistic, that's not the one to go for. But it sounds like, I love the sound it makes.
Cheap digital is pretty cool, isn't it? If you
Yeah,
get 90s
exactly
digital that's just trash.
So that one, and then combined with the Alesis 3630 compressor, which I got for 30 quid, sort of like last year. And then I run it through this old Mackie CR 1604 mixer. And I think all of those, including some cheap cables, add imperfections in the sound. And you can run exactly the same kick drum sample over and over again, and it's always going to sound, it just adds really subtle differences and a little layer of noise probably. So when you compress it afterwards, you run it through this, the compressor boosts that noise and it just makes it full of air somehow. It's just satisfying. I difficult to put with the finger on it, but I've started to do that. And then so one of fairly recent acquisition is this ARP 2600. Well, it's not ARP, it's Behringer's clone of it. I think incredible value for money. I've never had my hands on a real one, but I think this one sounds pretty damn good. So I just made some really raw samples, just churned out loads of that into Ableton. And then from Ableton, I just ran it through some of this hardware while I was just turning the knobs on the effects and stuff. I got 2 dirt cheap guitar pedals as well that I just run things through and just makes it come alive.
I think there's a lot of merit in doing this because it's sort of like, well, for me, the way that I think about it is that if I'm going to reach for a folder of kick drums that I've made, albeit like generatively and some convoluted process of being able to make tiny variations to the same sound, like whenever I go in that folder, I know that I'm going to be satisfied with all of them because I made them. Whereas if I go into some random folder I got off BitTorrent 10 years ago, I'm going to be there going, oh no, not that one. And so yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for putting that time into just kind of creating your own library of stuff.
I would also say that it's a really good exercise if anyone is stuck, not knowing, like, okay, what shall I do today? I don't know. I don't have any inspiration or composing something. Just like make sounds. Like there is like, you can split that time up and just sit like, make new hi-hats. And actually that process in itself can inspire you all of a sudden to sort of make something later on, but just like build sample libraries. I've been thinking about other things as well. Like I've done, there was a little bit of that in my old library, but not something that I've indulged much in, but actually going and recording real things, just all sorts, and then just like process the hell out of it.
Like field recordings.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Going to the kitchen and bash away at stuff. I don't know. I think it's, just because like, you know, you're not sitting down to make music doesn't mean that you're still not making music. Like, I think there's lots to be said for spending a few hours just making hi-hats from jangling your keys into a microphone or something, and just, you know, it's all about finding things, and then you find something and you get excited about it, and that motivates you to want to take it further. And also, you know, I mean, we've had a few conversations about authenticity, but not a huge amount of public conversations about authenticity, because I think we all know that that's one of my favorite topics, of like how actually I don't really care that much about it, and I'm more about sensation rather than authenticity. But it adds a huge amount of authenticity to your own work. I think the also just learning about the synthesis about these different sounds, like even though I always think of them as like it's doing the job of, rather than actually necessarily being a snare. Like it's something that sits in that region. It doesn't sound anything like a snare, but it does the job of the snare. And when you work out how to make sounds that fit in that categories, I find that incredibly satisfying. And I think the last big thing that I like, one of those big discoveries, like I watched some tutorials of how to make your own clap sounds, and I found that super rewarding. But wow, this sounds amazing. This sounds like a proper drum machine clap. And then I started experimenting, because one of the big sources of sound in a clap is noise. And I wanted an interesting noise source. So I just took an old FM radio, and you can just like, that's the source. And then you just apply the envelopes that you need onto it. And you just like get infinite of really interesting clap sounds by just like scrolling through the bands on the radio.
I think what is interesting about this is there's some unwritten pressure about the home producer constantly producing work and showing some evidence of that. But for years, like use the example of, say, I play guitar, and I know that Duncan does as well. We're just noodling away for fun in front of the TV. So this idea of playing with sounds, like when I will sit for hours playing around with an oscillator and a filter, just making sounds, and for no reason other than it's just good because it's vibrating the table in a funny way that I like. You know, it doesn't go down particularly well with the family. I'm not saying, but I don't know. It's just you like playing around with sounds. I think that's a great way of unwinding, just playing with no goal in mind. As you say, just make sounds. Those sounds may not be needed, but when I go back through things like that, I guess I wouldn't even call it a sample library. It's just some crap that I've accidentally recorded. Often that's the stuff that I'm going to go to and use for things.
Yeah, I'm going to delete my sample library. I've been inspired by your endeavors to, like, I know you're not deleting yours. You've archived it and made it publicly accessible. But the reason is because you're just going to go and make a whole load of new ones.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to do the same thing. Yeah. I've
decided.
decided.
Now, live on Dead Rush.
I was kind of thinking, is a video of me deleting files compelling? Is that going to be like, people are going to be like, I'm going to get a comment like, that's 5 minutes of my life I won't get back. I'm going to get those types of comments if I do that.
But can you do something at the same time as you have that progress bar of deleting, and you will have to achieve something while that is doing? Can you experiment with sounds while you watch it being washed away?
Maybe. I don't know.
Or have you made a piece of music which consists of samples that you're throwing away, and as the library is deleted, your track is being, I don't know. No, it wouldn't work like that.
Maybe I could make some sort of max patch that browses all of the samples in some sort of musical way, but then deletes them after that they've just been auditioned.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a sort of, I don't know, like
use
a kind
it or
of
lose it.
It's like a party, like a goodbye party for a sample library.
Can you make a generative patch that would actually use your entire library at some point in that composition, but as soon as it's been using something, it goes. So it's just going to a celebration to the entire library. They're going to get their brief moment of.
But they have to be deleted.
Part 2 of that video is going to be something like that happening, and part 2 is you having to shell out 400 sheets to get someone to restore your hard drive.
Or I'm going to be like, I deleted them all and I regret it. I want them all back. So now I'm going to sample the video that I made so I could get all the samples back by sampling the video of me browsing the samples. It's all a bit meta and stupid. Well, I mean, so what else for the future then?
So the next thing is I got a deadline on the 17th of February to.
Oh, I think I've got that deadline too.
I think you do. Yes, for the next compilation from Point Source Arts. So they will obviously need to design and master after that. I think it's due to be released in April. It will be out to the public to find on Bandcamp. You should definitely check out Point Source Arts' other releases. They have some really good artists on there. But yes, I need to finish that track I am also, build sample library, finish that track. I am also keen on making maybe just a little EP, because I feel like since I made the album, I have learned a lot more about tonal things and melodies, and to utilize that a lot more. And also indulging in running things through the hardware effects, and I'll have to restrain myself not to buy anything new. I've actually decided to sell a piece of equipment. It's up on the desk, packed away, and it's going to go up on eBay. I'm going to sell my
Is it the Roland Space Echo?
No. No, it's not. It's the Arturia Micro Freak that is going.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's going to be on the Index radio station, online radio thing, early February. It's going to be the 30-minute set, which includes some of the tracks from the album plus some new stuff that's coming out.
And also, I'd just like to mention that the compilation is, the concept behind it is that everyone is making a track from the same collection of samples. Is that right? So everyone's been sent the same load of files, and we've all got to make our own thing with it, which is very interesting.
It's called Genome, and this is the third one. And the sounds for this genome came out of the second one, so it's like a sort of mutating process. You're not restricted to only use those sounds, but you have to incorporate them. But you can then sort of add your own stuff on top, and you can obviously manipulate and modulate the hell out of those sounds too. So, but there's some good sounds in there.
Okay, well, I think maybe we can wrap up there, shall we? The
Sounds
book
about right.
of Needlecraft by the Fellow Passenger is available now. Link will be in the description. Go and check it out, and go and follow on YouTube and all that stuff.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, chaps.
Thank you so much.